Sure. I'm sure everybody would like to take a little nap right after lunch now. So the best thing to do is turn the lights off. Just for a second. I'd just like to very quickly go through the vulnerability assessment approach that we're using for individual homes here down east. I will remind you that if you're interested in having this done for your house, we will do it, and we will do it for free. That offer will not last forever, so I recommend connecting with Karen and giving her your name and contact information soon if you're interested in having this done for your home. Real quick, this was my number one in my speech before lunch, right, is keep people dry, and this is designed to help people gather the information they need to make decisions about their own home and utilities at their own home. And then we'll have our panel talk a little bit about transportation, which was my number two, and utilities. This is Chris's house. Don't go bother him or anything like that. But Chris was one of our guinea pigs for doing the initial vulnerability assessment. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly to save time, but just to show you generally what we do. This vulnerability assessment protocol was developed for the Department of Interior. We've had a grant from DOI for about 10 years to assess the vulnerability of every piece of infrastructure in every coastal national park in the United States of America. So this vulnerability assessment protocol that we're using on your house was also used on the Statue of Liberty, outhouses in the Everglades, totem poles in Sitka, Alaska. It is what the National Park Service is using right now to understand their own vulnerability and make adaptation plans. Next slide, please. We gather a wide variety of available data sets related to exposure to hazards. We start with a data mining operation for your particular area. Next, I'm not going to go through this. Next slide. We gather physical information about your particular property. This is Chris's backyard. We weren't actually there for the flood, but Chris was happy to share some photos with us. Next slide. And then we're looking at things like FEMA's flood maps, which are not great, but it's not a bad place to start. So we'll show you exactly what flood zone that you're in and what the projected base flood elevation is at that property for a 1% event or a 100-year flood, at least from the perspective of FEMA and their flood insurance rate maps. I will say that down east, if you are at base flood elevation, you are too low, generally. And that FEMA-based flood elevation is generally not adequate to keep your home dry from a Hurricane Florence. Next slide. We gather the high-resolution LiDAR data so we can help you understand the topography. And this is all written up in the analysis that you get. So you can see in this particular property, you can see the floodway that comes over towards Chris's house. And this sort of helps us understand the geological setting that your property is in. Next slide. We look at shoreline change within the vicinity of your property. For some places, shoreline change is not an issue, like here, but for some folks, shoreline change is a bigger problem than flooding. Next slide. We look at sea level rise inundation models. Again, if you're just using a bathtub model to raise sea level and see how that's going to move the shoreline, that's really not that big of an issue for most people unless you are literally teetering on the edge of core sound or something like that. The most important thing about sea level rise is that it's pushing the water up underneath all of these properties as well. And so that's why we get more runoff with rain. But that's a long story. Next slide. Then we go through sort of detailed NOAA slosh modeling, and we will show you what your property would look like with a variety of different categories of hurricanes. Next slide. We do a sensitivity analysis, which looks at what is the elevation of your first finished floor, where's your heat pump, have you lifted it up off the ground, are you on a slab, are you on a crawl space, a variety of things like that related to the nature of your house. So the first part is, will the water get there? And then the second part is, what happens when the water gets there? The two of those together equal vulnerability. Next slide. This is good. Next slide. The part that most folks probably want is this last part, where we look at the elevation of your lot, the elevation of your first finished floor, and then we compare that to the different flood levels from different events. So we can tell you approximately, with the Category 1 storm, how much water is going to be in your yard, will it be in your house? Category 2 storm, how much water is projected to be in your yard, how much in your house? So if you're thinking about elevating that structure, this is the guidance that you need to decide how high to go. All of this goes in a lovely little report. The other good news about that report is that all of the folks working on this, and I actually don't, you might be surprised to know, don't do any of this. My staff does. I've got a fabulous staff. They are all licensed professional geologists. So we can stamp this if you need to do something official with it. If you have an avenue to get funding to help you raise your home, you need an elevation certificate or something like that. This work has been done by people who are licensed in the state of North Carolina to do this kind of work. That's it. Thanks. You can bring the lights up now, please. Again, you know, at the moment, we've done 5 properties. We're happy to do more right now, and hopefully provide folks with information that will be helpful to you as we go forward. And that's the lady to see to get that done. So now for the second part, we'll bring our panel. Who left their vodka up here?
Oh, that's water. That's me.
Oh.
Sure. A lot of water.
We're very fortunate that at least one aspect and branch of our state government was willing to send quite a committee to be here with us today at great risk to themselves of being asked hard questions. So first, I very, very much appreciate you guys being here with us today. And I guess the best place to start is, if you wouldn't mind giving us a 4-5 minute introduction of yourself, and sort of what your role is within DOT and how that might connect to what we're talking about here today. And then I might ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll open up to the crowd, and then we'll do utilities after this particular panel. So.
All right. Good afternoon.
It's where I shove it in. Give me a second.
I got it. Shove it in there.
Yeah. Should go in there.
There we go. Awesome. There we go. I didn't want to break it. So that was the main thing. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Cabiness. I'm the division engineer for Division 2. If you're not familiar with the department statewide is divided up into 14 divisions. And so our division basically starts around Pitt County, over to Greene County, over to Beaufort, and then kind of down toward the coast. So Carteret County is one of our counties. We basically are responsible for maintenance, which maintains everything. So we're responsible for that. And So that's me. One thing I'll say that I learned earlier in my career, always surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And so I've been pretty well at doing that, and I'll let Jeremy introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jeremy Stroud. Jeff and I work together out of the Kinston office, but like you mentioned, we are part of Division 2, and we are responsible for 8 counties, with Carteret County being one of those counties. So, again, I help Jeff with the 3 programs he mentioned, the pre-construction, construction, and maintenance aspect of the department and what we do here in this area. And I'll pass it over to Matt.
All right, and I'm just here to help these guys. My name is Matt Lauffer. I'm the Assistant State Hydraulics Engineer for North Carolina DOT. I work out of under the Chief's office in Raleigh in Technical Services Unit. The Technical Service Unit basically serves and supports the divisions in the delivery of highway projects. So our focus at the Hydraulics Unit is water quality, floodplains, and then design and operations and managing water for the department. So anywhere water goes, we go. So that's what we do at the Hydraulics Unit.
So, tell us a little bit about the challenges that DOT is facing in dealing with flooding in eastern North Carolina, in particular, within this county, and what you are currently doing to address flooding issues. Maybe where what the obstacles are, what you're doing right now, what the obstacles are. That's a pretty open-ended question. But give us your perspective right now on what's being done and what the challenges are.
Okay. Well, the first thing is, so we're one of the largest landowners in the state, but what we own is just the right-of-way. So we've got the road and the right-of-way. So on a secondary road, that's 60 foot wide. On a large road, it may be as much as 350 foot wide. So our purpose with DOT is to have transportation facilities, to build to get people where they need to go, emergency services, goods and services. And so our piece of drainage is twofold. Number one, keep the water off the road, if you can. And number 2 is the water that's coming toward us is to accept that water and then convey it underneath the road through pipes and culverts and bridges and things like that. So that's like the bare bones of what our piece of the pie is. However, we own facilities in all the communities. And so as these issues are facing the communities, they're facing us too. And so a lot of times we have the ditches alongside the road. We can clean those out, but we can't make it go away from the road, really, because that goes off of our right-of-way. And we don't have the permission, the funds, or the people to make that happen. So there we run into an issue. There's another issue of funding. Maintenance is one pot of money, and constructing the new stuff is basically another pot of money. And that's very basic, but that's basically the way it is. The highway fund and the trust fund. So the highway fund is basically what we use to maintain the roads, resurface the roads from time to time, and then the other pot of money is for the trust fund is like for building the bridges. Like the big bridge that we've got coming from the mainland over to the island, that's paid for out of a separate pot. And that pot of money is a lot bigger than the maintenance pot. And so we take the money that we get each year and come up with a plan to maintain what we have and do the best we can with it.
I'm about to say the only other thing that I can add is that, during hurricane, I've heard a lot about hurricanes, emergencies, that kind of thing. We're here to remove debris from the roadways. We're here to push the seagrass off of 70 and 12 down here, and to restore the network once it's affected, the roadway network once it's affected during those emergency kind of catastrophic events as well.
So, to anyone who's trying to get around down here when there's a king tide and the wind's blowing the wrong way, gets out there and looks at those roads and says, if only that road was 6 inches higher. Which seems like a simple thing to do to some folks. Maybe you could help us understand why it's not quite that simple from a DOT perspective.
Right. And I'll let Jeremy talk to some of this, but basically, we were talking earlier. We've built everything that's cheap and easy, and so everything we do now is expensive and hard. And so everything we do has, can have negative consequences that we always have to mitigate. One thing is finances. We're trying to kind of spread the money around the best we can. So if we're going to raise a road several inches or say it's a foot, that's a lot of asphalt that goes down in one area that we can't spread around. And we don't have an endless pot. We get a little piece each year, and so that's our charge is to try to help most people, most communities that we can with that money.
And you mentioned the Harkers Island Bridge. What was the contract cost on that? $60 million?
$60 million.
So we just did an express design to just widen 70 and 12 from Merriman Road, the split off to come down east to the Cedar Island Ferry. And for that project right now, in today's terms, you're looking at like $140 million. And again, that project would score and would be prioritized with every other project in the state. And there's different metrics that we use to evaluate those projects. But again, that's a large number. And again, that's not even raising the road for that distance. That's just to widen, to put the 4-foot paved shoulders on it, to give folks a little more, I reckon, room to, if they depart from the travel lane, some area to recover and come back on. So what we do is expensive. And it's just one of the things to consider is, again, the funding part of it and how you secure funds to do that kind of a project. Because again, it would not be feasible under our maintenance program. It would have to go through, again, that program where we prioritize projects through and rate them against all other projects in the state.
And so that cost didn't even include raising the road?
No, I think that's just to build on existing. Yeah, I don't know that there's any elevation change gathered with that project.
Sure.
So I know in other areas of the state, there's a design process or a design stage where you look at different strategies for relocating roads, or for the Outer Banks, you have a series of bridges along Key Island. I'm just wondering, has there been any design scenarios for this region? Are you guys at that stage yet where you might even think about what that would cost through designs to raise roadways?
That be addressed under the Clark County Transportation Comprehensive Transportation Plan.
So let me back up and explain. So I said there was two pots of money. There's the highway fund and the trust fund. So projects basically come to us through the planning organizations. So the planning organizations are the rural planning organization or the metropolitan planning organizations in the state. There's not a scrap of land that's not
outside of those regions.
Yeah, outside of those regions. The one down here is the Down East RPO. It covers 4 counties in our division. And so all the projects that go in our scoring system come through them. So I just say that to say that we don't necessarily decide which projects that we're going to work on. So the projects have to be scored against each other, and the ones that score the highest get the money to go into the design phase. Resiliency is something that's new to try to capture and put a qualitative number on. But we are looking at, when we start going into design, we are starting to look at those things. But like Jeremy said, it does really raise the cost on some of them. So it doesn't make them score as good as they would without it. So it's not a simple solution. I think the next cycle of scoring is going to have a component, from what I understand, of resiliency in it. So you'd get scored extra higher points if what you do is going to be resilient. So hopefully that'll help on our projects down east.
Matt, let me ask you a question. To the extent that you can answer this is sort of a high-level question. I'm curious whether, when we're looking at flooding in existing transportation corridors and roads that you're responsible for. Are you seeing in Eastern North Carolina, is the king tide and sort of surge flooding more of an issue, or is it changes in the patterns of precipitation-driven flooding that's happening more and more frequently these days? Like, where are the real headaches coming from? Is it that coastal flooding from king tides, or are you seeing a significant increase in precipitation-driven flooding, inadequate culverts, that kind of thing? What's the big picture?
Yeah, I mean, when we approach a design, we typically have a design criteria, right? And so you guys are talking about frequencies, like 50-year event, 25-year event, that type of thing. So different facilities have levels of service, like interstate highways are 50 to 100-year type level of service. Secondary roads, maybe more like 25-year level of service, that type of thing. So we look at that function. So those are all tied to flow equations and things like that we have on those frequencies. So to answer your question on, we're working with climate scientists and things, look what the precipitation is going to be in the future, right? And so what drives a lot of our designs now is more of what's that criteria going to be for the future, right? So we're seeing information that the 500-year now it's going to be the 100-year in the future, or the 100-year is going to be the 50-year in the future, meaning things are going to get more intense as we go forward, right? So as engineers, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to spend our dollars wisely. And it differs, like if you're talking about I-95, that's a different infrastructure than maybe a secondary road, right? And so we look at, what is possible and what can we do. So on a design side, we're looking at more of those events like the hurricanes, the surge, sea level rise, and what are the implications of those on that facility that we're building, and then what's the life cycle of that facility as well. So it doesn't, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but we're definitely looking at the hazards that can adversely affect that facility, and then how do we best design it for when we are looking at improving that facility.
Mm-hmm. But we're looking at on the maintenance side, even just replacing older pipes. We just replaced one a few weeks ago on 70. I think it was when that around Davis.
I think so, yeah. And we've got plans to replace the one with the steel
all
plates
right.
over it,
Yeah.
just before
So
the Arkansas turn off.
It went from a 24-inch pipe to what we call a bridge pipe. It was a 55-inch by 72-inch wide pipe. So the pipes that we're putting in now, when we do that, we get with the hydraulics unit for them to tell us what size pipe we need to put in. So even the maintenance type side of replacing the pipes that are there are getting so much larger because of what they're running.
Yeah, I mean, I recall that for a while there, at least when there was federal pass-through and sort of Stafford Act spending through FEMA or something, that there were restrictions on the degree to which you could improve a system. I mean, is that still the case, or are you allowed to make things better when you're coming in there after a disaster?
I know, just on the pipe side of things, I know we now get hydraulic recommendations on every pipe we replace. That's a requirement, I think, now through FEMA funding. So if we have future events, we can show that we've brought it up to the current standards. And hopefully if there's any damages, hopefully there is no damages to that structure again, but if there is, it's not because we put an inadequate pipe size in that would not meet the criteria for that event.
Okay.
Are you doing culverts and pipes under only roads, or do you do it under bridges for railway?
We do not maintain rail with the Division of Highways.
Yeah. We've tried.
Yes.
We've tried in a few instances and was not met with very good success.
So then here's the hard question, right? If you live down east and you are seeing roads underwater that you've never seen underwater before, and it's happening more frequently than you've seen it before, and some of these communities are like little islands onto themselves, even though road that you're driving on to get out there doesn't have a bridge. You're going through a wetland. So what's the future for maintaining that transportation infrastructure in a place that's this challenging when really the fixes that we need probably aren't going to come out of your maintenance budget, right? If what we need to do is raise some of these roads a foot at least, you know, and then it has to compete with all the other projects. So, you know, what are folks supposed to think? What's the future? What can you tell us about?
I think to get a project like that started, needs to go through the RPO to kind of get it officially on our radar so that we can actually start spending some real planning dollars for it. That's how when the project goes in, we can actually, that's the first time that we can actually get some a firm on board, engineering firm, to actually go and start looking at some of those. Honestly, that's not something that the department has done traditionally. So this is all new to us too. We have recently in another county close by, we had a pipe that in a road that flooded. It was a one-way in and one-way out, and there's several hundred, at least, people live down this road, and so it flooded during Matthew and couldn't get fire rescue down. So we was able to replace that pipe, but it's taken literally years. But what we had to do was show the environmental agencies that we weren't going to flood anybody. So we was able to put a new pipe in, raise the road to a certain level. Not that the road would never be underwater again, but that it would be minimal where you could at least get in and get out. So it may, have 4 inches of water on it, but it don't have 1.5 feet. And that's something new that we've started looking at. So it's going to take a firm really that's got some time and money invested in it to be able to look to see if you raise the road, what are the secondary, collateral damage kind of sort of things. We don't want to be in a situation that if we raise the road and we inadvertently cause somebody to flood, then we're liable. And so we're always trying to dance that line of doing the most good we can, but not hurting anybody in the process either.
Got a question over here.
Sure.
I don't actually have a question. I have just a comment, and I think y'all are probably too humble to come out and say it, but I just want to highlight that you have an incredibly broad mandate within a limited budget, but many of you have been incredible partners on projects working towards resilience, and we can go after external funding, working with military installations, the coastal federations, and those really just incredible projects. I think it highlights that you can go after those external funding, that DOT is a great partner to addressing those challenges.
Okay, here's my other hard question. Do y'all have the capacity to collect and assimilate the data that would allow you to understand where that flooding is happening all over eastern North Carolina? Are you doing that right now, or
you just took up the rest of the hour?
or do you need people to be calling you and telling you where it's happening? Tell us how you know. Okay.
But I'll let Matt. Describe what
we can talk about. We're doing we have a strong research program at North Carolina DOT where we do. Catherine's working on some of that stuff she mentioned today with Evan Goldstein. Did I get that right, Catherine? Okay, good. So and we're looking at where are those vulnerable points in the network that if we improve that one, it improves a lot of the network, right? And then we're working with climate scientists, like what is the future precipitation. So we're working with NC State on taking Florence and Matthew and Floyd and Ivan in the west and looking at it today. What does it look like today? And modeling it today. And then we look at it in 2050, and then we look at it what that precipitation is going to look like in 2100, right? And then we can use that data to do vulnerability assessments. So we have a vulnerability assessment that's currently being finished up from It's on 70 and it goes all the way from the Cedar Island Ferry all the way up to Raleigh, right? And then we're looking at criticality and vulnerability of that highway system, and see where since that's a major corridor, right? Where are the vulnerability points, and then how do we need to look at that for the future?
That's been completed?
It's in process. Yes,
It's in process.
Yeah, it's pretty close. We just got to finish up some things. But it's a model, right? All models are wrong, but some are more useful than others, right? But that's so we're looking at that corridor, US 74, some other key corridors in the state for different hazards. We've got landslides in the west, we've got sea level rise and hurricane inundation and things in the east. I think the other major thing after Florence, there was this huge realization that we could do better about knowing what was going to happen to our transportation network during these major storm events. So working with, I think we're all blessed in North Carolina to have a really strong partnership with our cabinet agencies. So North Carolina Emergency Management, they did significant work after Floyd to better understand how our state floods and where it floods. And so there's tools like the Flooding Inundation Alert Network that kind of have gauges around the state and then that show if the river level is at this level, then these homes are being flooded, these buildings are being flooded. So during Florence, we kind of got the idea, well, hey, we need that for the roadway network. So, we started out on the news, we had like 5 stations. We're now up to like 73 gauges across the eastern part of the state that are monitoring roadway based on existing real-time water surface elevations. And then we've partnered with other folks like Dr. Ludick and Blanton at the Center for Coastal Resiliency Excellence to use the AdCirc model. So ahead of a storm, like we started like 96 hours before landfall looking at what roadway networks will be inundated by that hurricane track. And so we process that data, we feed it through to our divisions and let them know that this is potential areas of impacts that you might want to be watching. And so they can manage their resources a little bit more effectively, hopefully. Now that's just in the last, Florence happened in 2018. We're getting these systems running. And then we have another system called BridgeWatch, which is monitoring continuously 24/7, 15,800 structures across the state, all our major bridge structures and culverts. And that either by gauge or by rainfall across that watershed or the tide cycle will be monitoring those locations. So we have a better understanding of the vulnerability of our facilities and structures so that we can manage your number 2 issue, the transportation, right? That we're trying to get a better handle on so that we can, potentially recover faster, respond better, and potentially save lives, by knowing these things are coming. So we've been doing a lot of work in that space in the last 5 years.
So is any of that, like the bridge monitoring, is any of that available in any sort of public-facing web access? Sort of like Feynman, works.
So all that's getting connected to Drive NC, and so and we don't also want to have any conflict with what emergency management's putting out, right? Because they manage the system very well in and around the counties and things. So we want to make sure. But to our people in DOT, they're getting this information. And it's helping people like Jeremy and Jeff manage what they need to manage during that event. So we have meetings with the chief engineer, prior to the storm events, and we on a daily basis, if it's not a couple times a day, just to manage that, what's happening on our network. So we're just feeding that information to the people that actually do the work in the field and make those decisions. So.
Just take a couple more questions. Go ahead.
What part of your modeling exercise do you feel most uncertain and uncomfortable about? What do you need more information about?
So we're always interested in how the model's performing, right? And so when we're also comparing it to the gauges that we have out there. So there's that calibration validation part, and then how well have we mapped the surface, right? The LiDAR surface that we're using. So most uncomfortable is just that tracks change. So AdCirc's pretty good at predicting, right? It's shown some really good capabilities, but it's also a model, right? It's going to be off. So I think we're still learning and we're validating after events and looking at where we can improve. But There's the mapping part as well as just how is the model performing. We've only got like 2 years under our belts, and we haven't really had a big hurricane and I don't want one. I'm hoping we build these tools and they don't come, right? That's the idea, right? So, yeah.
I would guess the data availability to both calibrate and validate the model is probably problematic in most locations. Like maybe you've got some places where you've got good enough data that you could look at past events to do both a calibration and a validation, but that data doesn't exist in a lot of places. We'll take one more question.
You wanted validation. Just a real quick thing on answer. We used that during Florence, tapped into it, raised some things that were in sheds outside a couple of feet on the basis of that. We thought the storm surge would never get that high. But, well, just in case, answer says so. And we saved a lot of money on that equipment that we raised. So, right point specific to the dead end of our dirt road.
Wow, there you go, Rick Ludick. There's a prop for, I don't know how many Rick Ludicks there are, because I think there must be a lot of them, because the number of things he's involved in is absolutely ridiculous. He must have 20 posts on.
Well, I do have a question. Your problem is funding. How are you placed in terms of the state receiving funding from the federal government on the resilience funding that's coming down through the feds right now?
Yeah, a lot of the grants now are really focusing on, the IIJA brought, about 28% additional funding to transportation. The IIJA, the bill, the infrastructure investment, also known as the bill, bipartisan infrastructure law. So it brought more funding, right? And resiliency is a big part of that component. And there's also actual programs like Protect, which are focused on resilience. And there's actually program funding that goes to each of those DOTs, and then there's discretionary funding that you go after grants. So, our department's trying to leverage both of those effectively for resilience, planning and investment. So
some of that money will come down to North Carolina.
Yes. Every state's allocated some Protect formula funding that goes directly to the states, and then they're utilizing it that way. So.
And because we're so desperate here, will we get more?
We do a good job at North Carolina going after reallocation. So there's states out there that don't spend their money, and then we go after that money because the Federal Highways puts it in a pot, and then you can go after that. I'm not an expert on this, but I know enough to be dangerous. But then we actually go after other state that money that's available. So we do a good job at that in North Carolina.
They call it August redistribution, and we've got some really good people that are really good accountants. In the last 2 years, I think last year we got an additional $271 million, I think, and this year's about $265.
That's great.
So we're going after every dime we get, and I promise you we'll spend it if we get it.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. You're free to go.
Thank you.